You all know by now that my history with Bowers & Wilkins runs pretty deep. Over the past 2 decades, I have reviewed over 20 pairs of B&W speakers, everything from their more affordable entry speakers to their iconic 800 series, which I've been fortunate enough to call my own. Now, I know you guys have seen the new 801 D4 signature make more than a few appearances on our recent videos, and let me just tell you one thing. There's seeing it, and then there's living with it. Real quick history lesson. Bowers & Wilkins' first Signature Edition loudspeaker actually began with the silver signature all the way back in 1991. A speaker that was designed to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Bowers & Wilkins and its founder, John Bowers, who sadly passed away shortly before the silver's release. Now, several more Signature Edition speakers would follow, each one sporting unique finishes and important component upgrades. Which brings us to the 801 D4 signature. The signature is more than a fresh coat of paint. Each detail of the signature has been carefully crafted and sees numerous updates over the standard 801, including crossover upgrades and a modified cabinet with a refined downward firing port. There are improvements to the woofer and a new, stiffer aluminum top plate for the mid-range and tweeter to rest on. Of course, there are more superficial upgrades, such as its 2 new finishes. Ours is the Midnight Blue Metallic, or you can go the more classic route with the California Burl Gloss. The special editions also have color-matched full-grain leather from UK-based supplier Connolly, who, caters to many top-tier automotive brands, such as Bentley, Aston Martin, and Rolls-Royce. Let's talk about this speaker's size. It's as imposing as it is stylish. While they may not look it, the signatures at 48 inches tall are almost the same height as the KEF R11 Meta. But at 18 inches wide and a depth of 24 inches, their beefy presence makes for a far grander statement. The signature has 2 10-inch bass drivers, a 6-inch continuum cone mid-range, and a 1-inch diamond dome tweeter. Its reported frequency response of 15 Hz to 28 kHz makes the signature a true full-range loudspeaker, no subwoofer required. Sensitivity is stated to be 90 dB, but before you get too excited, the signature's impedance fluctuates wildly, ranging from a nominal 8 ohms and dipping lower than 3. Even Bowers & Wilkins' suggested 50-watt power recommendation is a little bit misleading. Despite having relative amplifier-friendly sensitivity, this is just not a speaker you can skimp on when it comes to power. I know it can be fun to test speakers on budget amplifiers and proclaim them as good or better than everything, but the 801 signature is not a loudspeaker you cut corners with regarding power. While the RCAM A25 drove the signatures surprisingly well, it's still not a pairing I would necessarily recommend long term. And the same can be said of the Yamaha 2000A. I mean, both amps, they're gonna work, but this is one speaker where you need an amplifier that does more than just work. Amplifiers with higher output, like the Class A, or better yet, a bargain by comparison, the McIntosh MC312 pay huge dividends to ensure you're actually hearing your money's worth. Nothing against the Class A Delta stereo amp, but the MC312 really takes the signature's low-level dynamics, bass, and treble control to just another level. After living with these speakers for over 3 months, McIntosh's new C55 stereo preamplifier, their MC312 stereo amplifier, and our Eversolo A8 as a streamer with our Audio-Technica LP140 XP and Ortofon LVB cartridge for vinyl playback was my absolute favorite setup for the signatures. That said, we spent a lot of time with the Eversolo and Audio-Technica disconnected. Our Apple TV 4K and Sony X90L fed directly into the C55 sounded amazing. Believe it or not, this hybrid stereo home theater setup sounded as good as the strict stereo rig. Now, if you're considering the signatures, it's up to you to get their placement just right. Now, Bowers & Wilkins recommends placing the signatures roughly 5 to 10 feet apart to create an equilateral triangle with your primary listening position. They also recommend having a minimum of about 18 inches between the speakers and your walls. B&W's direction is spot on. The signatures sounded best placed about 10 feet apart and roughly 2 feet from our front wall, putting them a little bit over 10 feet from our primary listening position. Now, some speakers don't change in tone too much as you move them forward or backward from your front wall, but the signatures, they do. If placed too close, their bass response became too pronounced and even boomy at times, at least with respect to our left speaker, which sits closer to a corner in our room. Now, moving the speakers out roughly 2 feet resulted in a really good balance across the entire frequency response. I experimented with toe-in, but ultimately found that the signatures sounded their best and most linear when pointed straight ahead. Their dispersion is so good that towing them in didn't dramatically improve the soundstage definition. However, toe-in definitely upped the treble presence, transitioning from a more or less balanced sound to a brighter one. So if you struggle with intelligibility, or maybe you have some high-frequency hearing loss, pointing the signatures towards your primary listening position will likely pay off, but for everyone else, I would recommend them pointed straight ahead, and spend your time playing with their physical distance from one another to enhance the soundstage detail. Lastly, for the most critical listening sessions, Bowers & Wilkins recommends removing the grills, which I happen to 100% agree with. While these speakers have clearly been developed using science and measurement tools, Bowers & Wilkins has looked beyond measurements, tuning and voicing their speakers to arrive at a very particular sound, which is evident in the speakers in-room and near-field measurements. The 801D4 signature is not a neutral, linear, or Klipple-blessed loudspeaker. In the near field, we can see a mostly linear response starting around 23 Hz on up to 2 kHz. There are a few peaks and valleys around 200 Hz, but nothing too crazy. There is a sizable dip starting at 2 kHz that carries over to about 5 kHz, where we can observe up to a 5 decibel rise in the tweeter at about 10 kHz. Now, comparing the near field to the in-room response, we see more bass energy is present, no doubt caused by our room, though ultimate bass extension remains very impressive. Again, the upper bass and mid-range trace largely the same line as what we observed in the near field measurements. However, the dip coming out of the mid-range and into the treble is lessened with distance and a lack of toe-in. Remember, the measurements at our listening position are with the speaker pointed straight ahead, so you can see a mild off-axis response here. Off-axis, the signature's tweeter is very linear, with a bit of roll-off that starts at around 10 kHz. And as I mentioned, this is a very tunable loudspeaker through placement and toe-in. Like with any loudspeaker, even an ultra-high-end one like this one, placement always matters. To be honest, I didn't want to measure this speaker, not because I feared what might have been found. I just didn't want to because I don't think it matters, especially when discussing a loudspeaker like this, because your purchasing decision is likely to be largely, if not entirely, emotional, something no measurement can tell you or hope to gauge. At the end of the day, if I'm spending this type of money, why spend time worrying about charts and graphs or whether or not they prove that my decision to buy this speaker was worth it? If you're doing that, let me know when you're ready to enjoy the experience, because I'm going to be over here enjoying the heck out of myself with the signatures. While I've had the good fortune to live with several Bowers & Wilkins speakers over the years, including the original 800 series Diamond and its CT variant, this speaker is hands down an elevation of that sound. When properly set up, the signature is one of the most holographic windows to my favorite music I've ever experienced. For such a large loudspeaker, there is a delicacy and an agility to the signature sound that puts it on a level with some of the better two-way monitors that I have ever heard, like the Focal Diablo Utopia Color Evo. Only the D4 has bass befitting 2 reference caliber subwoofers. Then there's just the sheer scale the signature is capable of, a scale that will defy the boundaries of your room, with dynamics that rival some of the best large-scale horn speakers that I've heard. Yes, that means I'm talking about the KLIPSCH SCALA. And the signatures can pump out some serious bass. I mean, who's surprised by that? With 2 10-inch woofers, these speakers go beyond just hitting the low notes. There is a quickness to the speaker's woofers that showcase some of the clearest, most audible detail and texture I have heard at any price. While I love our reference SVS Titan loudspeakers, it's not even a contest. The Titans may pull their weight against the KEF and their R11 Meta, but they sound two-dimensional and, well, fat compared to the B&W's far more realistic and natural sounding bass. This is undoubtedly the result of the signature's robust cabinet, a cabinet that is nearly void of any color of its own. And this enables the signature's organic bass reproduction to be heard at all volumes when powered correctly. I am talking from like 40 dB all the way up to 100 plus, making it one of the most impactful and engaging low-level listening speakers I've ever heard. And speaking of low-level listening, the Signature's clarity at lower volumes carries over throughout the mid-range. Vocalists and actors have better inflection, greater scale, and detail playing at low volumes than any loudspeaker we've had. We've been able to listen at some of the lowest volumes I can recall without missing a word. For all you Carls out there, don't be afraid to turn things up. The tone of the speaker's mid-range, it doesn't change, nor does its presence. It just scales appropriately with volume. And that scale, coupled with the weight I just talked about and the speed from the dual woofers, makes this speaker so infectious. Vocalists have a real, and I'm talking palpable presence and physical dimension between the speakers. I have spent the past few months listening to some of my favorite albums, like REM's Automatic for the People, 07 Simple Things, and Fiona Apple's Tidal. Those listening sessions, they felt more like a private performance rather than just listening to a recording. Lately, the battle over whether or not any B&W speaker is good or bad has come down to how you feel about the tweeter. The Signature can come off as bright, and in extreme cases, it might be fatiguing to some of you, but like the 805D4, which served as a reference in 2023, if you set these speakers up correctly, the 801's highs can be exacting, but they're also really good. The Signature's top end, it's wide open, extended, and completely distortion-free. Of course, if you put on a poor recording, you won't get a free pass, and there's bound to be a track or two that's going to leave your playlist rotation, but everything else will sound like nothing you have ever heard. The way the Diamond tweeter hangs on to every nuance, allowing the breath of an artist or instrument to suspend in space just that moment longer. It may be subtle, but it's one of the traits that gets you to suspend your disbelief and forget that you are listening to a recording rather than the real thing. I cannot stress to you how real instruments like cymbals sound through the Signatures compared to just anything else. The Signature's shape and design has evolved, and its current iteration is no accident. The speaker looks this way for a reason, and that reason is dispersion. The SOUNDSTAGE is unlike anything I have ever experienced. It is wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling, and borders on surround. It's not a wall of sound, though. It is incredibly purposeful and accurate. Whether listening to orchestral works or simple singer-songwriters, every person, performer, and instrument occupies their own space within the vast SOUNDSTAGE. It is spooky, too, how effortlessly the rather large 801s disappear within the SOUNDSTAGE they create, with a center image that is just, chef's kiss. Dynamics, though, those aren't easy to come by. Like I said earlier, this speaker needs power and lots of it. The RCAM was impressive and even got the 801s to play loud, but I wouldn't call the experience effortless. The McIntosh MC312 made the Signature sound flow like water. When properly powered, there is no ceiling to the speaker's dynamic capability. Simply apply volume to increase the scale. Regardless of the volume, you will be engaged and able to hear the most minute shift in inflection and intensity in a way that just few speakers can match. It's almost impossible to compare any speaker to the B&W, unless of course you have just a handful of $50,000 loudspeakers just lying around for the heck of it. And I know many people are going to think that I'm crazy for comparing the SCALA to the Signatures, and on the one hand, I'm going to agree with you, though if you're willing to put down your bias, both speakers excel at the recreation of space and true-to-life dynamics. Besides the Signature, the KLIPSCH SCALA is the only other speaker since starting this channel that has actually made me forget that I review gear for a living, because these two speakers do one thing better than any other speaker I've heard, and that is break down the fourth wall we audiophiles have. No, not the wall between actor and audience, but the one that we build between ourselves and our own hi-fi happiness. WHARFEDALE's awesome ELYSIAN 4 may not be comparable in price, but it is comparable in size and in some ways performance. The ELYSIAN is an exceptional loudspeaker, one that admittedly I do forget about from time to time, which is totally my fault and not the fault of the ELYSIAN. That said, it's not the Signature's equal. It doesn't play as deep, it's a bit richer and more pronounced in the mid-range and nowhere near extended up top. And maybe that's actually a good thing for some of you. I know a couple of albums in my collection that would be saved with the ELYSIAN's more polite approach, but as good as that WHARFEDALE is, it's no Signature. The one speaker we've had on this channel that gets the closest to matching the performance of the Signature is Monitor Audio's Platinum 200. At 14 grand, the Platinum 200 is practically a bargain in comparison. It's far smaller speaker that plays almost as low with similar mid-range linearity and a top end that looks eerily similar to the Signature, at least in our room. The Platinum 200 is a great, underrated loudspeaker that, when set up correctly, can come within spitting distance of the B&W for a lot less money, not to mention less space. But the only loudspeaker I believe that the Signature needs to be compared to is Wilson Audio's brand spanking new Watt Puppy. The two speakers are similar in size, driver complement, build and finish quality, price, and not to mention target market. Sadly though, my review requests continue to go unanswered, but I'm going to keep trying because Wilson versus Bowers & Wilkins, that is just a debate that has entertained the hi-fi space for decades. Now, I don't know whether the Signature is worth the premium over its brother, the 801D4. I have not heard the 801D4 in any capacity, let alone side by side with the Signature, so I can't begin to say if the differences between the two will be audible. But I can say this much. In my past experience, when able to directly A/B B&W Signature offerings against their traditional counterparts, the differences haven't always been night and day, but they've been there. The irony isn't lost on me that the Bowers & Wilkins 801D4 Signature isn't really a speaker you review. It's a speaker you experience for however brief a time, because only a handful of people will ever get to call a speaker of this caliber their very own. And regardless of how you feel, whether you're for or against such luxuries, it doesn't change the fact that hi-fi still needs products like this. While it may be popular right now to pass judgment upon products like the Signature based solely on its price, its pedigree, or the brand behind it, to do so is kind of missing the point. Speakers like this do so much more than cater to the super rich. They push the boundaries of design and technology and ultimately serve as a benchmark for others to aim for, whether people want to admit that or not. But more importantly, products like this, they often spark new enthusiasts to start their journey, or maybe, just maybe, more poignant still, they remind cynics like me that maybe their passion for this hobby isn't dead yet. So that's it. That is now my take on Bowers & Wilkins' fabulous 801D4 Signature. Now it's time for you guys to tell me what you think of the speaker. I am very curious where the conversation about this speaker is going to go. So sound off in the comments below. And if you have a very specific question, or maybe I missed something, be sure to let us know. You never know, could end up in next week's Unplugged, where you're going to get Christy's thoughts on the 801 Signature as well. Otherwise, if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Christy's left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you have continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here, and both of us thank you very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for me today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. See you Friday for a brand new Unplugged. And until then, take care.